I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, back with another edition of Giant Offseason Questions here at Oilers Nation, brought to you by our friends at Sherwood Ford the Giant. And today's question is centered around Evander Kane. Now, the winger scored at an over 40-goal pace in his short time with the Oilers last season, and there's a lot of talk about whether or not they'll be able to re-sign him. That's probably a debate for another day. Today, I want to focus on what the Oilers could do if they miss out on Evander Kane. He's a player who's likely going to chase the biggest contract he can get. There's a lot up in the air right now with his current contract status with the San Jose Sharks and a potential arbitration hearing with the NHL. So what if the Oilers can't bring him back? What is plan B for Ken Holland when it comes to filling that void that Evander Kane leaves in the Oilers' top six? Well, there's basically three routes the Oilers could go. They could dip into the UFA market and just sign a free agent like they did last summer with Zach Hyman. They could look to acquire an RFA, a young forward from another team, or they could just go the pure trade route and see who's available on the market and give up a few assets to try fill the hole next to either Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl. Let's start with the UFA market, where I'll be honest, there aren't a lot of great options that appear to be good fits for the Oilers. As you can see here on the screen, these are all the players who scored 20 goals or more last year who are pending unrestricted free agents. Now, at the top of this class, you have guys like Forsberg, Gaudreau, and Kadri. They're probably not fits for the Oilers because they're going to cost too much. So as you check down a little bit, there's someone like Valeri Nichushkin, who a lot of people will look at as a really good fallback option for the Edmonton Oilers. But Frank Saravalli, a Daily Faceoff, is reporting that Nichushkin could very well get a contract similar to what the Oilers gave Zach Hyman last year. I'd be a little bit nervous about paying that much money and giving that much term to a player who's only scored 20 goals in his career once. Yes, he's having a great playoffs, but sometimes it can be hard for players to replicate that kind of success. So I would maybe stay away from a guy like Valeri Nichushkin simply because he might cost a little bit too much. As you continue to go through the list, there are options like Nino Niederreiter, who scored 24 goals in 75 games with the Carolina Hurricanes last season. Andre Burakovsky, another Colorado Avalanche forward who's scheduled to hit unrestricted free agency. He had 22 goals in 80 games as well. Neither of them are going to produce as much as Evander Kane did here in Edmonton, but they would be a few $1 million cheaper, and they're actually not terrible options, but again, not slam dunk backup plans for Ken Holland. There are a few other options on this list who won't cost nearly as much as a guy like Evander Kane. They probably won't cost as much as someone like Andre Burakovsky either. The first one is Ilya Mikheyev. Ken Holland last summer went and signed a former Toronto Maple Leaf, and it worked out pretty well for the Oilers. Mikheyev scored 21 goals in 53 games last season. That's a pretty solid pace, and he did it all playing basically in the Toronto Maple Leafs middle six. Now, if he came here, he could be a decent depth option for the Oilers, who gives them some scoring in their middle six. Is he a guy who can score 30-plus goals playing with Connor McDavid like Kane? I don't buy it, but again, he'd be significantly cheaper. Another player I'm interested in is Mason Marchment. Now, he didn't score 20 goals last season, but that's mainly because he didn't play in all 82 games for the Florida Panthers. He scored in spurts. He had a crazy 6-point game last season for the Florida Panthers. He won't cost very much, but he's relatively inexperienced at the NHL level. So again, expecting a guy like that to come in and fill a big void in your top six probably isn't that realistic. But if he's a part of maybe one or two additions to the Oilers forward group, he could be a solid depth player for them. Moving on to some RFA options. There are three RFA forwards that I find really interesting: Lawson Crouse, Dylan Strome, and Victor Olofsson. My favorite of the bunch is Lawson Crouse. This guy scored 20 goals last season in just 65 games for the Arizona Coyotes. He wasn't playing with a lot of talent there. He's big, he's young, he's under team control, and he's reportedly on the market as well. If the Oilers can bring this guy in, I could very well see him hammering home 25-plus goals next to either Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl. Again, he wouldn't produce nearly as much as a guy like Evander Kane, but he won't cost nearly as much to sign either. You would have to give up some assets to get his rights from the Arizona Coyotes, but I think Lawson Crouse could be a really intriguing fit in the Oilers' top six, as would a player like Dylan Strome. Now, he had a bit of an up and down run with the Chicago Blackhawks, former top 5 pick. He's also very close with Connor McDavid, and the Oilers have had a bit of a tendency of going out and getting players who are tight with number 97. He popped home 22 goals in 69 games with the Chicago Blackhawks this past season. There's a lot of talk that the Hawks may not even want to qualify him this summer, and that means he could be had for relatively cheap on the trade market, and his next contract shouldn't cost you too much either. He's a guy who can score 20 goals. He's close with Connor McDavid, so you'd imagine he'd fit into the locker room well. I think Dylan Strome could be a really intriguing buy low candidate for the Edmonton Oilers. Another option for Ken Holland is just to go the straight up trade route, acquire a more established player and bring them in to replace the production for Evander Kane. I took a look at Frank Saravalli's trade targets list, and there are some rather sexy names at the top of this list. Guys like Alex DeBrincat, Kevin Fiala, even a veteran guy like Blake Wheeler. But these players are likely going to cost you a lot. And with Fiala and DeBrincat, their next contracts are probably going to be $1.5 to $2.5 million more than what Evander Kane will get on the open market. So if you're open to getting a guy like DeBrincat or Fiala, I just think Ken Holland would rather spend a little less money and bring in the sure thing, the guy he knows fits into this Oilers top six in Evander Kane. So I don't see Fiala or DeBrincat as really, really realistic options. Jesper Bratt is a guy who I personally love. Every time I watch this guy, I think he's one of the most underrated players in the NHL. But the cost to get a 23-year-old who's coming off a near point per game season, it's going to be a lot, and I just can't see Ken Holland ponying up that kind of assets in order to get him. Even with a guy like DeBrincat. I mean, it's great to throw out trade proposals, but I would imagine DeBrincat costs you a first-round pick, Dylan Holloway, and probably another roster player on top of that. I just can't see Ken Holland spending those kind of assets, so I don't think Fiala, DeBrincat, or even Jesper Bratt are that realistic. The one name on Frank's trade targets list who's been thrown around a lot is Josh Anderson. Now, there are a lot of reasons to love this player and the potential fit in Edmonton. He's shown he's capable of scoring 20-plus goals in an NHL season. He would add some size to their top six, which they'd be losing in Evander Kane, and he's under contract for 5 more seasons, so you'd get this player for a while. There are also a lot of red flags when it comes to Josh Anderson. He's wildly inconsistent. He can go months with just scoring 1 or 2 goals. He's injury prone, rarely plays in all 82 games or every game in a season. His cap hits $5.5 million, which would make him one of their more expensive forwards as well. And the Habs reportedly don't really want to move the guy. They want to hold on to him, and they would need to be blown away with an offer in order to move him. So are you willing to give up a first-round pick and another asset for Josh Anderson? With all those red flags I'm listed, I'm not really sure that I am. So Anderson, he's an intriguing option, but I'm not sure he's a great plan B for a player like Evander Kane if the Oilers do miss out on him. So what would be the best strategy? Well, in my opinion, I think it would be to throw a couple darts at a few younger players. I'd love the idea of bringing in one, or hey, why not both, of Dylan Strome or Lawson Krause? Or if you get one of them, maybe you go sign a guy like Mason Marchment. Maybe you sign Ilya Mikheyev, and you just find a way to round out your depth a little bit. You know, you're not getting a 40-goal scorer in any of those players, and you're losing a potential 40-goal guy in Evander Kane. But if you can bring in someone who pots 25 next to Connor McDavid while using the saved cap space from not signing Kane to add a third liner who can also score you 17 to 22, 23 goals, then maybe you're actually a better team than if you just brought back Evander Kane. It's an intriguing question. It's going to be an intriguing situation, and it'll be interesting to see how Ken Holland potentially handles losing a player like Evander